JB here. Hope everyone's doing outstanding. March 11th, 2025, Tuesday, 9 a.m. Talk really quick about the market, some of the names I'm looking at. Go from there. Just hang on one second. But what a week it's been so far. Monday, we gapped over 1% to the downside, and the selling continued down another percent. Well, S&P was down almost a little over 3% at times in the afternoon before a bounce. NASDAQ closed off over 4%. And just continuation after highs. February 19th, I think, is the highs, right? So remarkable stuff. You keep hearing the chatter with the R word, the recession. I think it's the U word, the uncertainty. And the unfortunate thing, what's going on with the tariffs and the uncertainty is we probably won't get certainty unless there's some rollback or some compromising on the tariff situation, or we start getting data, right? And we won't get data for quite some time. I mean, we're starting to get the consumer confidence stuff and maybe some of the manufacturing angst, but outside of that, it's tough to say, okay, this is we have solid facts back in the tariffs or what have you, and removes that uncertainty. So until that happens, probably gonna be a little tricky here. Uh, Let's see here. Okay. So me, I always talk about support resistance on the SPY. So that's kind of what I'm watching. But yesterday it was like a slow meltdown in the markets. It was like a controlled sell-off. And it was like the bulls just they were nowhere. It was like they just gave in yesterday. There was no big bounces until the end of the day. And even that was kind of a weak one. Uh, and during some of these pullbacks, especially, I mean, the big pull on the Nasdaq's down. What was it, 14%? Let's see. We have the year to date numbers now. So if you look at year to date, the Nasdaq's down 9.5%. I think it's down 14 or 15% since February 19th. You would think that there would be some kind of capitulation move, some bottom, or at least a short-term bottom or what have you. And it wasn't there yesterday. So uh, it feels like we need some kind of washout. I don't know. We'll get some bounces. I try to trying to keep a glass half full kind of scenario here, but it just feels like we need that. So I don't know if we're going to get that today. Maybe it looked like overnight we might get it before a bounce. But want to see that during the day. I don't know if it'll happen this week, next week, but I think that'll be hopefully at least a short-term bottom. So I'm not saying we can't bounce. And some of the issue with being bearish in market and buying and holding puts is the holding part, right? It's very hard to, if you think the S&P's or the SPY's going down to 480 in the next 3 weeks, it could get to 480, but there might be some crazy bounces that just squeeze you out of put positions. Very hard to hold puts uh, in the market, especially the further we go down, the bigger the bounces become. So I continue to keep things small on both sides. And you have to think 540 is going to come on the SPY. I don't know if it'll be today, next week, or the week after. Feels like that's the first spot. We kind of like we're there. Might as well just rip the band-aid off, get us the correction, and then go from there. But maybe some bounce here today. Tomorrow we get CPI data. I mean, that'll be very important in regards to, if we do get cooler or inline numbers, maybe that just starts to raise the possibility that the Fed might be a little more aggressive cutting rates. It was only a month ago or 2 months ago that it seemed like we weren't going to get any rate cuts this year, and now it looks like so we have the meeting in a week and a half, and then the next meeting is not till May, which a lot could happen between 6 weeks from between a Fed meeting. So right now, it's a 50% probability now that the Fed's going to cut rates in May. That was down at like 15% a month ago. I'm sure the lower we go, or the more volatility we have, the higher that probability is going to increase. And maybe we have a Fed put in. Maybe that saves the day. But for now, just continue to watch support and resistance. 563 was the October lows. 555 was back in September. So it helps keep it in perspective. I was saying yesterday, it's not like we're at multi-year lows just yet, right? Knock on wood. You got to go back, we were at 480 back in August with that yen carry trade fiasco. So it helps keep things perspective. Not saying we can't get there, but in the whole context of things, there's, I always try to find silver linings. Also, nice historical. I always love little charts. I think this was from Market Watch. It shows all the instances from of the market or the S&P gapping down 1% and then having another 1% intraday sell-off from that gap down, and the performance of the market 3 months after. There's I think it's 32 instances, n equals 32, and 31 of the 32, the markets were higher by a decent proportion after in those 13-week time frame. Not saying we're out of the woods just yet, but it'd be funny to look back at that stat and see if that comes to fruition. Also, some things to note, and I think some of this is because of what happened with Tesla yesterday, Apple weakness, but there's still 43% of stocks on the S&P are trading over their 50-day moving average. We were lower than that earlier this year, so kind of helps keep things in perspective there. And also the amount of stocks trading over their 200-day moving average on the S&P, still not anywhere near where we were back at the end of November, so of 2023. So always try to help keep things in perspective. All right, so that's overall names. Just some individual names I'm looking. I don't know why I don't have them all here on the chart. So I said it yesterday afternoon on the rant. I was looking for put hedges, and when the market was pulling back last Monday, the premiums on some of the puts were less expensive, a lot easier on a risk reward basis to play for downside or protection. I was talking about J.P. Morgan, the 245s, 41 cents. I think got them out. The stock was trading like 258. So a $14 move. Yesterday, JP Morgan's at like 240. I forget where it opened. And I'm looking at like the 225s and they were a heck of a lot more expensive. So similar on Visa, even I was using the analogy with MicroStrategy. Strategy. MSTR was 299 on last Monday, and it sold off all the way down to 250. The 200 puts were a dollar for most of the day. Yesterday, you look at when it was to 250, they were $3. So just the risk reward is a little different. Of course, if we continue to sell off, they'll be profitable, but they're not going to be 500% or 1,000% or 700%. They'll be 100% or 100 or 200%. And not only that, you're only making 200% and holding it. It costs more to make that. So that's where the risk reward comes in. So on the flip side, I was looking for names that had relative strength, that had premiums were not as expensive. And Biogen was a name I was looking at all last week. Finally pulled the trigger on some calls yesterday for next week, so I have some time. You start looking at some of these mid-cap names in the biospace that were strong yesterday. VRTXs, Gilead, Regeneron. Wouldn't be surprised to see this trade into the 160 or so. So got those strikes. 200-day moving average is right there at, why don't I have this on my screamer here? It's all the way at 182, but it's over its 50-day moving average. I think that just bodes well. And you look at the volume the last week or so on Biogen, it's like either a fund or funds or someone is acquiring or uh, adding. I don't, keeping it well bid. I don't know what it is, but to me, it's just ride the train. And because of that, there's no event, no catalyst, so the premiums are pretty inexpensive on a risk reward basis. So really like that one for upside if we bounce. And same with Caterpillar, relative strength here. This is the one that if it breaks, and it did it. If you take a look at the start of the year, and that's when I got those strikes to play for the monster move, and I missed the back end of that, but take a look what happened when it broke its 200-day moving average start the year. It just took off. And not saying a similar thing is going to happen here, but I do think there's an opportunity to make some money if the market finds some footing. So hopefully, and Caterpillar was over 350. That sold off a little bit into the late morning, then back over 350 into the afternoon. There's some succumb to pressure. I think there's trade 365, 370 this week if the market finds some footing. Also, I talked about Ralph Lauren. I was talking about it all last week too, looking at March puts, but only $10 increments on the puts, and monthly strikes and the liquidity and the spreads makes it tough to enter. Of course, sure enough, I should have entered the puts. I think they were 150 or so when I first started looking. Then they were $2, and a huge block went through with $3 later in the week, and then yesterday they were $18. So hindsight, probably should have added those, but now you start looking, the chart almost looks like it's pinching. So not going to rule out that there's not going to be a continued sell-off at some point, but some of these names might have a short-term bounce. So if that happens, I think there'll be opportunities to play some of these names for bounces. DocuSign reports earnings after the close Thursday. Another name that has just been destroyed since its earnings report December. I think it ran all the way up to 110. It's just been kind of a slow meltdown. Could be a nice premium build into earnings Thursday afternoon if the market finds footing. So might look for some strikes there. And then on the flip side here, it's 555, right? So we don't want to break 555. And then you look at I think it's 540 is kind of like the spot there, and that's still only August lows. So it's not like we're in uncharted territory here. But you see the headlines and all that. It's like it feels like it a little bit. But some of these names that have been carrying the Magnificent Seven, it kind of those have kind of held the market up. So you had that market breadth situation, and now as they're going down, some of these other names maybe they'll start performing well. So Anyway, let's have a great day. I'll be back on audio later if things get crazy or I have an update. But I'll definitely be back on in the afternoon. Let's have a great day. Rock and roll.